From the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina, this is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, presented by A Cloud Guru, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And, you know, one of the things that we've talked about a lot on this show is DevOps. We've talked about the technologies around DevOps. We've talked about kind of cultural changes around DevOps. And the more and more I get a chance to get out and talk to people who are trying to implement this, talk to companies that are in the middle of sort of, you know, either the technology or cultural transformation, is they always come back and they say, you know, it's always harder than I thought it was going to be, or you know, the amount of moving pieces necessary to sort of make this work, you know, don't always line up with maybe what I heard at a meetup, or, you know, an Adrian Cockcroft talk or something like that. And so I thought what would be interesting to do today is go talk to some folks who, you know, are living and breathing this, trying to make this a reality, but are also, you know, kind of focused on some of the stuff that people mention as the hard things like governance and security, and, you know, some of the stuff that's not the, you know, just let developers go as fast as they want. So excited to have on the show today Josh Stella, who is CEO of Fugue. Josh, welcome to the show.
Thanks much, Brian. Really happy to be here. I've been a fan for a number of years.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, before we jump into Fugue and some of those sort of big, nasty topics, give us a little bit of your background, because you've been in this space for a while, both as an executive as well as a technologist and so forth.
Yeah, you bet. So prior to founding Fugue, I was a principal solutions architect at AWS. Okay. Largely focused on Department of Defense, as well as some other government agencies, NASA. But I'm a geek going back a long, long way. So I started programming like many of us did early in my life, and became a professional programmer in the early 90s, working on, of all things, next step systems. Did a lot of systems architecture, worked on various projects, some of the early websites and so on, back in the mid-90s. And yeah, so most recently worked at AWS. Prior to that, I spent a number of years as a lead architect at the U.S. Coast Guard, of all places, when my son was young and I wanted a 9-to-5 job. And so I'm very much a CTO-leaning CEO. My hands are deep in the technology of Fugue, and a lot of the ideas occurred to me while I was working on national security kinds of problems, although they're applicable across the board.
Right, so, right.
Does that help?
Yeah, no, that's great. And Fugue's been around for quite a while. I think you guys have been around since 2012, 2013, and you know, well funded, and you know, been in this space for quite a while. Yeah,
we really got going in early 14. We got the company funded, and a few of us in a room in 13. But really got cranking in 14. Worked with a bunch of design partners on a few iterations of the technology. As you said in your introduction, these are really, really hard problems, and so it took us a few different iterations to really get it right. And we launched our commercial product in 2017, and are really getting some good traction coming out of 17 and into 18. So it's exciting times over here.
Nice, very good, very good. Well, listen, like I mentioned in the intro, you know, DevOps it's a hard thing. I mean, culturally, you know, it's asking people to change what they've done, oftentimes for maybe not just years, but decades. And so we have this kind of constant thing of we should get the flow of software moving faster. We've got, you know, the cloud is out there. Things like AWS are out there. The public cloud's out there that, in theory, should make things simpler. It's sort of on demand. I don't always have to think about the complexities under the covers. And people still are still trying to figure out how to make it work. As you're sort of, you know, interacting with companies that are saying, hey, we'd like to do DevOps, or maybe they you know, phrase it as, we want to be more agile, we want to develop software faster, or just we think we want to use the cloud. What do you find are some of the early kind of best first steps that you can guide people with that say, look, these will pay the biggest dividend. These will kind of move you in the right direction, you know, sort of to get them over the hump of this complexity?
Yeah, so I love AWS. I love cloud. I work there. I'm a huge proponent and believer in it. The notion that API-driven infrastructure is going to be simpler, I think, is wrong. It's more powerful. It's more agile. But it actually, if used well, creates more moving parts. And when we talk about things like microservice architectures, which are great and appropriate in some places, when you talk about going from compute instances to containers and serverless, and then realize you're going to do all of these things within a single application boundary, as well as traditional infrastructure like networks. These APIs, in other words, giveth and taketh away. They give you this ability to go really fast, which is awesome. They give you the ability to have things that are quite ephemeral, that are short-lived, which is smart if you want to contain costs. But that creates a very, the constant change of the infrastructure environment is what we're talking about here with more components. And so I would say I think that it's important to differentiate in terms of getting started and learning and then being successful in the long run, that there are really two different stages of using cloud. The first is learning about it, which is pretty easy to do.
Right.
And just go to a console, do whatever you want, learn about it, figure out how it applies to your organization. But when you are ready to actually adopt it strategically, you need some ordering framework around that. You need some ability to say, okay, how are we going to wrap our heads around this as an organization so that our developers can go really fast and be innovative and make new things, but we're, not going to spend tons of money we didn't think we were going to, and two, not end up on the front page of the newspaper because of some breach. Those are very real. And so you have to actually consider that as you go there. And, of course, that's what Fugue's all about. I don't want to jump straight into what Fugue does, but that's why we're here, is you have to do that. And you brought up Adrian Cockcroft. Not everyone's Netflix.
Right.
And it's a really hard class of problems. So I think that the first thing is when you're getting your feet wet, just go crazy, try stuff, not with production data. But once you understand kind of what you want to do, try to figure out those organizing principles and tooling around it. The other thing I would say is in most organizations that are adopting cloud strategically, there's this kind of incremental approach to hand-rolling code in-house to try to get your hands around these problems, because at first they look easy,
right,
and kind of fun. It turns out they're really hard, and they're really not much fun in the long run. So, try to find if in your organization there is a team saying they are building a cloud management governance framework, look at it closely, because that's a marriage, not a date. You're going to be living with that code for a long time. Right.
Yeah, and there's, for as many stories as there are about successes in that space where it's sort of do it yourself, solve a problem that didn't seem that complicated at first, there are just a ton of, we reached a point where we didn't want to maintain it anymore. That person that was key left the company, and so on and so forth. So, hey, listen, one of the things that you talk about quite a bit, and there's tons of examples out on the web, and we'll put some stuff in the show notes, is this concept, kind of an emerging concept that people are referring to, sort of, they're calling it DevSecOps or SecDevOps or OpDevs, kind of essentially saying, we feel like as we were getting the dev team together and the ops team together, security kind of got left out. And you know what? We sort of did that before too, and we want to remedy that. What does that mean? I mean, I've heard different approaches of this. It means, include, embed the security team into the dev team, embed the security team in the security team. I've heard, use certain tools. What are you seeing in this DevSecOps kind of, evolution, if you will?
Sure. So I'll start with a broad comment, and then I'll get specific and come back to the broad comment. We're going to get tired of appending things to dev.
Yeah.
And the reason is software is eating the world. And with API-driven infrastructure, pretty much all functions having to do with compute infrastructure will ultimately be development functions. So we're going to keep adding that onto that list. Security is kind of the next obvious one, but it's going to keep going. So what does that mean practically? It means often what we see success when people do. So the way Fugue approaches this is we think all policy must be expressed as code. That when you think about a fast-moving ephemeral infrastructure, humans cannot approve things fast enough for them to be utilized, right? If you're spinning up a bunch of EC2 instances or containers or whatever to handle some ephemeral job, and you need that to happen very quickly and automatically, it can't be a 2-week process to get certified and accredited, or a 2-month process to get certified and accredited. It has to be automated. The nature of cloud is that you have to automate these functions. And so our solution, the only one I've been able to come up with, is that you have to be able to express policy as code. In our case, you've got to get it through a compiler with a static type system and make sure it's right. And then the enforcement of that policy after the fact needs to be automated as well. So you can do that by, we see people out there doing things like writing a bunch of Lambda functions to look for certain conditions to autocorrect back. It's, we think that's kind of painful. Our approach, we believe, is better. But I think that the main thing is security needs development chops now in order to write that code and vend that code. Mm-hmm. I've seen this work well in 2 models. One where developers get embedded in security, right? You don't really want security to kind of have, you do want to keep the concerns separated because security has a different role and responsibility. So our approach to that is the security team can vend code libraries that are enforced. And so your developers can go try to do whatever crazy stuff they want to do and be innovative. I'm a developer. I like trying crazy stuff. And because security can now vend policy as code, if I try to do something that's not allowed, I get in my code editor or IDE a message saying, hey, you're not allowed to do that. Here's why. Here's the line of code. And so instead of being prescriptive from the security side, I can just create, these are the policies that need to be in place. Somebody has to do that. Yeah. So I am now seeing also security teams being built of developers. From the beginning. I was just talking to a CISO who said, when I built out this new security team, I hired DevOps engineers. I think both models work. Yeah.
Well, and it's sort of, it's funny. My co-host who's not here today, Aaron, recently changed jobs, and he said, it was interesting. I turned in my badge, and he said within, literally minutes, the HR department had automated certain things so that, payroll was going to happen and access to, certain funds that maybe were outside the company. Like all of that kind of got shut off, right? So we've done these things before where we say, like, look, an action happens, a bunch of automated stuff happens kind of automatically. We can put that in. And but it's strange that we've never kind of made that part and parcel of what we do every day for security, and yet we see these breaches happen. We see, huge DDoS attack at GitHub last week. We see these things that you sort of realize, exactly like you said, you kind of can't afford to wait for somebody to make a decision to sign off on an approval. Like certain things just have to happen because hackers aren't going to wait until, they're not going to do it during 9 to 5. They may do it off hours. Things happen faster than you think. Somebody's on vacation. Like it has to become part and parcel of just saying, look, scenarios are going to happen, and they just have to be embedded into the things we do.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think that security for many years has been kind of living with stuff they've inherited, right? Sure. The internet was not originally designed to be a secure platform, right? Et cetera, et cetera. We now have an opportunity with cloud to get security by design and upfront.
Yep. Yeah, and that's the thing that sort of jumped out at me as I was looking at Fugue is we've always had things like governance and compliance were kind of functions that had to happen. They would happen periodically, and now with some of the technology that's out there, we can essentially like you were talking about, we can sort of build these persistent, constantly evolving kind of guards and railings around what we do, so that you kind of never can get outside of compliance, but also, security is sort of built around the structure that you're creating.
Yeah. I mean, I think of it as kind of let's turn security into highway builders instead of toll booth collectors. Right. In the past, they were a hurdle you had to kind of get through. Instead, let's make them vendors of goodness. Right. And that's one of the beautiful things about being a developer, is you can make things that have value and that move things faster instead of slowing them down. And so I think when you can formalize what you mean by security in terms of design, and by that I mean express it in code, all the stuff we've learned to do for decades around development suddenly get applied to security. And that's really cool. And so the cloud is this huge opportunity to get a phase transition in how we do this stuff. And I think it's really exciting. I don't think that the security people like saying no all the time,
right,
or being perceived as the roadblock. I think they're gonna have more fun vending things than saying no.
Right. Yeah, and we hear this. We've got some good friends that work CISO jobs at fairly large organizations, and they said one of the biggest challenges they have is that really good security people, really experienced security people, are kind of leaving that segment of the profession because they feel like they're kind of always scapegoated. And like you said, in a lot of cases, they're kind of, you walk in day one and it's like, okay, here's this giant mess that you have to deal with. Now go be successful. And you're like, okay, it's a hard pile to climb out from under sometimes, when your real purpose is, like you said, to be helping people be successful, right? You don't want to be the Department of No, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, the reason I started thinking about the technologies that are now in Fugue was I realized many years ago, 7 years ago or something, that because everything is API driven, you could apply computer science to it. Mm-hmm. And that's never been true, right? Before infrastructure, the compute machinery was mostly manual and spreadsheets, and then you ran software on it. Well, now the application itself is kind of summoning its own infrastructure in the case of truly cloud native patterns, whether it's through autoscaling groups or containers, whatever. The application is bigger than the infra. It used to be you pack the applications into the infra on your data floor. And so that means we now have I remember the first time I got a program to run successfully, and I think most people who've written code feel this way. There's great satisfaction and joy in that. Well, if we can do that with security too, where you can write code right now, for example, we're writing the whole NIST 800-53 control set as compilable, executable code. That may sound weird. And don't get me wrong, NIST 800-53 isn't fun, but it's fun to get it to work in an automated way.
Right. Well, and quite honestly, just take the government sector, for that. The prospect of saying, hey, this gigantic document, this this new law, this new certification came out, it's 1,000 pages or whatever the heck it means. I mean, the last thing you want to be doing as a CIO, as a CISO or whatever, is saying, I'm spending valuable resources on people having to read through, decode, figure out what all this means. I would just like it to be, something that you say, hey, it's in code and it can be validated, like anything else, like a firewall rule or something like that. It's early, but it's good that that type of thinking is evolving like that.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of that. And I would say that, when I've lived on both sides of that table, I've sat on both sides of that table where I'm signing off on things to say these are approved to go live, and where I was writing code. And when I'm writing code, when I look at those binders of rules, I think to myself, I'm not going to read that.
Right. Yeah.
I might scan it, but honestly, it's too much to, and I don't even. They're not expressed in ways that are definitive enough for me to even know if I'm going to get it right.
Right.
So I'll just wait for someone to tell me. So it's this very different experience, with Fugue. The way we built it is if you break a policy, you actually get a compiler error pointing to a line of code, and you can customize the error message however you want to say, like, well, you've broken the security rule, all disks must be encrypted, fix that, or Fugue won't build this thing for you. That's a very developer-friendly approach where instead of having to memorize a bunch of rules, you're exploring and you're going fast and you bump into it. So that stuff is achievable now, and it just wasn't before. So I think it's a good time to be in this business.
Right. It's good progress. Two of the things that jumped out at me as I was kind of digging into your technology, looking at things like Fugue Composer and some other stuff. Two of the things that I hear from people all the time is, number one, we're not always sure what we have out there, and out there could be their own data center. It could be, they've acquired a company and they've got to figure out what they have, or people have been putting stuff in the cloud for a while, and we're now kind of getting our act together and trying to, standardize it, or just you do a basic task of going like, let's inventory what's out there, let's figure out what you have, and not just make a spreadsheet, but let's put this into something that can then sort of be actionable. And then, the next thing you do, and we hear this problem with people talk about microservices, but it kind of applies to everything, is you visualize it. And there's the old saying of like, you can't measure what you can't, you can't manage what you can't measure. But when you have distributed things, and distributed things could just simply be, I've got some stuff in US East and some stuff in US West, and they both don't show up on the same console because of the way AWS does things. Like that, you're as blind with that as you are like not measuring something. And so the fact that you kind of tackled those two tasks early on gives me a sense that you understand kind of the scope of the problems people are going to have. It's not just a single point kind of solving something for somebody.
Well, thank you. I think you're right. I mean, we're certainly trying to solve for that. So the Composer is a client-side tool, and it automatically visualizes infrastructure, AWS infrastructure right now. And you can point it at your existing AWS infrastructure. So one of the things that I liked to do when I was at AWS, and I saw my customers liking to do, and I think people still like to do, is go build stuff in the console while you're learning, rather than trying to write code for everything up front. Mm-hmm. Because it's just, it's easier to get started. So what and you may have a bunch of artifacts that were built using lots of different technologies over time. Maybe a bunch of stuff got built with a console, and then somebody started writing some Bodo, and then somebody used some CloudFormation, and somebody used some Terraform. So we didn't want to say, well, you have to do everything our way. Instead, you can just point Fugue at what you've got, and we'll discover it. And when I was at AWS, one of the first things I always did, and then had to repeat over and over, was make a Visio diagram.
Right.
And they were always wrong. as soon as they hit air, right, they were wrong. And so what we did there, because we have this behind the scenes, we have a strong static type system. We can automatically generate these we think of it as kind of Google Maps for the cloud, these diagrams of what you have. And then, of course, you have to, the next step is, well, does this stuff conform to my policy? So we baked in a feature where you can kind of do this discovery process, get this nice, beautiful diagram, and then import, policy.lw, import the policy library, and it will tell you everywhere you're not currently in policy. And then you can bring the whole thing under Fugue management. So that's our approach. I know there are other approaches out there. That's how we've thought about it. I think, you hit on another point. I'm trying to circle back to it. Right. So, most people have lots of AWS accounts. Most organizations do. So we're definitely designed to work in those kinds of environments where a single Fugue virtual appliance called a conductor can manage dozens of AWS accounts. And it doesn't just do the provisioning. That's actually the easy part. Building stuff is easy. Living with it's hard.
Right.
So our approach to that is, once it's been provisioned, it can't be provisioned if it breaks rules. And then once it's been provisioned, every 30 seconds or so, we're re-examining it, which is kind of like a live configuration management database. We always know the state of everything.
Yeah.
And if anything changes, we actually fix it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So let me ask you sort of one last question as we wrap up. And we've covered a lot of topics, folks. We'll put a lot of things in the show notes so you can kind of go dig into this. What's the most kind of common advice you're giving to people in this space, whether it's around sort of security around DevOps, or it's around compliance? I mean, what's the most common thing that people are saying? Is it super high level? What do I do? Is it how do I solve a certain problem? What are you seeing most frequently from people making these transitions?
What I'm seeing most frequently is that the security. So usually there's a DevOps team who has taken an approach to some kind of partial automation, and they've run out ahead of the security team.
Okay.
And the security team are trying to get their hands around what's happening. And the business leader, right, the person who's got the P&L responsibility, is saying, go fast, go to the cloud. And it's really tough for security to wrap their hands around it. So a lot of our job is to try to kind of, when we interact with our customers, is to try to bring both those teams to the table and say, you guys are on the same side here, and you need to get in sync. Because if you're out of sync, you're going to get in trouble. Yeah. And I think we see that in the newspapers. So.
Yeah. No, it makes sense, and it kind of aligns to some of the challenges here. But I like that you sort of phrase it as like you're on the same team, because a lot of times the DevOps conversation comes across as well. Devs are incented to go fast. Ops are incented to be, secure and highly available and stable. How do you resolve that what feels like a conflict? I think the way you present it is, security is part of the, not only hopefully you can go fast, but it's got to be available. It's got to be secure. So you are part of that team. You're not kind of the outsider.
Yeah, exactly, and that does require culture change, and that's probably the tall pole in the tent, right?
Right.
The technologies are evolving, and Fugue is available, and I'm sure there are other approaches too. But getting those teams to see the possibility, to see the potential, and how they could work together now that in the past that just wasn't technically feasible.
Yeah.
Is a culture change.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, before we wrap it up, what's the best way if somebody, wants to, reach out, learn more about Fugue, try out the technology, or maybe see you guys at an event around town somewhere? What's the best place to engage with you?
Yeah, great. You can go to our website, which is Fugue, spelled FUGUE.co. We do a lot of events. I don't have an event calendar in front of me at the moment, but we always do reInvent. I think we're doing the AWS New York Summit, certainly in the summer. But we probably have some more current events in the next few months that I just don't have in front of me.
Sure.
But go to fugue.co. And if you want, I'm Josh at fugue.co. So you can reach out to me too.
Okay, very cool. And we'll get that in the show notes and Twitter handles and all those other things. Well, listen, Josh, thank you for the time today. It's like we said, it's always kind of good to dig into these topics, go find some people that, not only have lived this, so know where it's coming from, know the pain points, but are building technology that makes it sort of that next step forward. So you don't have to think about, is it compliant? Can I build this into my pipelines? And very cool stuff that you guys are doing at Fugue. So with that, we're going to wrap it up, folks. For Josh and for myself, thank you for listening, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more podcasts, show notes, and everything social media. And visit acloud.guru for all your cloud training needs.